So welcome back to the Stand Up Australia podcast, Stand Up Sits Down With. Now, we have been missing for a few weeks, and unfortunately we do have some sad news, but some good news as well. So please don't be upset when we tell you what we are about to tell you, but we have decided to conclude the podcast for the time being. I'm not saying it's a goodbye forever, but it is goodbye for now. But we do have some other in news and some other recommendations to share with you too. We just thought we'd tie it off with, I've been very busy. I know Robin's always busy. And yeah, so about 5 weeks ago was our last podcast, I think, 4 or 5 weeks. But yeah, just firstly, how are you going, Robin?
Good. Yeah, like you say, always busy. Honestly, I mean, I have this kind of reaction when people respond to the question, how have you been, with busy, because it's like the glorification of busyness. But yeah, let's be honest, I've been flat out.
Yeah, very, very busy. You're one of the busiest people I know. So it's and I do not know how you do it most of the time with the content you put out. And
I actually feel really, really unproductive when I compare myself to other amazing people. But that's always a dangerous thing, right? I'm comparing myself to someone when I have no idea what the circumstances of their life are. So anyway, I'm getting as much stuff out there as I possibly can.
Yeah, I think there's only probably 1 or 2 people out there that would struggle to compare themselves to anyone because they're already doing more than everybody else. So for the rest of us, you can always compare yourself to other people and you can always be disappointed in what you're doing. So yeah.
I was saying, I have this particular set of strengths and I'm just going to, go for broke on those. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And once again, if you haven't read Robin's Substack, and for God's sake, if you haven't read it yet after listening to us for this amount of time for the last 2 years, I think we've been doing this now, get onto the Substack, read it, subscribe. If you can't be bothered reading, she does a podcast too. So there you go.
Yes, I do. I know people these days can be a bit challenged in paying attention to text. So I actually read my own Substacks out, which feels kind of weird. But what's also great is when you're actually reading stuff out, you see all the typos, and I kind of like fix the grammatical errors as I go, and so yeah. Anyway, so the version of my Substack that goes out always gets changed when I actually do. But when I read it to do the podcast version of it. Anyway, just for those of you who might have noticed that.
Funny story about typos. I just released a new menu at my cafe a week ago, and I always print out a crappy copy first, one that can just be used for a couple of days, because I know there's always something there. So these 2 customers who are Italians are like, "Oh, you spelled mozzarella wrong," and I was like, "Oh, I knew there'd be something." So anyway, I took it back, and I was expecting it to be on the new part of the menu, which I had just typed out. But turns out it was actually the part of the menu that's been on there for 9 months. So
you just have enough Italians at your cafe.
That's one of the things I would have liked if I had seen it at a cafe or a restaurant. I would have been like, novices don't even know how to spell mozzarella. But
and you go, oh no, that was me.
Yeah. So I wanted to actually start, before we do get into sort of recommendations and what we're going to be doing from here. Just a big piece of news this week, and I think you being a journalist, I wanted to really get your take on Julian Assange and what this means. To be honest, I've seen mostly just like, yeah, Julian Assange is out of jail, but being I guess you could call us black-pilled a lot of the time, looking at things from what the actual implications are. I'm not going to say what I think right now, but what's your take on the whole Julian Assange being released issue?
So Julian made a plea deal, and I don't blame him for that at all. he has been, as anybody with two functioning brain cells who hasn't been living under a rock for all these years knows, he's been in a maximum security prison, Belmarsh, terrible conditions, not receiving adequate medical treatment. It's freezing cold. He hasn't been able to see his children grow up. He hasn't been able to spend time with his wife. Right. So you understand, he just kind of went, all right, I will plead guilty to charges under the Espionage Act, which is this incredibly draconian piece of legislation that, if I'm correct about this, and you might be able to correct me here if I'm off base, I believe that was cooked up by Woodrow Wilson or his handlers to smooth America's entry into World War One, and so essentially, in cutting that plea deal, again, I don't say this to criticize Julian Assange, but in cutting that plea deal, he is actually, I suppose, acknowledged or admitted that he committed a crime, and that puts journalists into a really invidious position. And I know Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has been tweeting about this, laying out the full legal implications of this. Matt Taibbi had a Substack about this. And again, no one blames Julian Assange for cutting this deal to win his freedom. But what it does mean is that any journalists who are in the position in the future where they're receiving information from whistleblowers, and whistleblowing is supposed to be protected under the law here and in the UK and in the US, that whistleblower protection no longer pertains. Okay, so this case unfortunately sets a precedent.
Yeah,
so that's
yeah.
concern.
Yeah, that was my concerns too. And you think back to like Glenn Greenwald with the information he got from Edward Snowden. He's in the same boat if he had been prosecuted anyway back then, because that was classified information. At the time, it does make you wonder as well, because there are a lot of thoughts about that information coming out from Edward Snowden, that was actually released into the public domain for a reason. And that does make more sense now, considering that Julian was prosecuted and Glenn Greenwald wasn't prosecuted, because his biggest crime obviously was embarrassing the government, embarrassing the US government, and
specifically the Clinton administration. I mean, those on the left side of politics were, happy as a clam with what Julian Assange and WikiLeaks had been doing, up to the point where he started releasing information that implicated Hillary Clinton in some, really nefarious acts, let's just say. And I know that in, conspiracy realist circles, there is a lot of, how would I put this? There are people who don't think that either Snowden or Assange were really on the up and up. I know, I've read, I suppose, disparagements of Edward Snowden as being Edward Snowjob. There have been criticisms of Julian Assange. He very famously decried 9/11 truthers as being crazy. So, I mean, we live in a world where it's really difficult to have 100% trust in anyone that you don't know intimately, and even them you might have suspicions about, and so we look at these public figures and we, what certainty can we have? It certainly appears that Julian Assange was not was persecuted by the establishment. It's kind of undeniable. He's been locked in Belmarsh prison, but again, it's like, how the hell do I know what's actually going on here? So, I mean, that's probably overcomplicating my answer to your question. That the simplest answer is that was a really bad day for journalism. And
yes. Yeah, it was a bad day for journalism. But once again, you can't you cannot fault Julian Assange for being
Don't
locked
blame
in that prison. He's got a young child, a wife he's never been in the free world with, and you just can't fault him for doing that. But yeah, I mean, it's worked perfectly in the end. It's a win. It's a win for the US government. It's a win for the deep state. It's a win for the world government, because now with all these new laws coming in, these digital identities and the misinformation, disinformation bills, which are already going after journalism anyway, this does mean that anything that the government does not want you to know, if you do know it and you put it out there, you will be prosecuted. And that is a fact from now on.
Yeah, and that's terrifying, and it's very clear what the implications of this are, and obviously anyone who's in journalism who still is worthy of the term. And I'd love to have a quick chat about Tucker Carlson's address in Canberra, which has gone absolutely nuts. I'm pleased to say. So anyone who's a journalist who really does take that job description seriously is going to be looking at this outcome and going, am I willing to risk my life, my freedom, to give up, to have the serious prospect of giving up absolutely everything to get this truth out to the public? And let's face it, even the bravest of them, 90% of them are going to go, no, it's not worth it. And who's going to be on my side? Who will advocate for me? As I might as well throw it in now. As Tucker Carlson said, why wasn't Australia sending a military flotilla up the Thames to go bust Julian Assange out of Belmarsh, to say, to the British government, you are detaining one of our citizens illegally. He's not been charged with anything. Let him out, or we'll frickin' fire a missile at your Houses of Parliament. Right? Yeah. So who's going to go into bat for you? Your government? Oh, please. Your government's going to go into bat for you. Oh my God. If you still believe that, I don't know how to help you.
Well, this is the geopolitical situation we're in, isn't it? Because Australia, unfortunately, is the US's bitch. And it's been that for a long time. And there's nothing. I'll put this in the show notes, but I just watched a really interesting interview with Leith Van Ollensen from Macro Business, and I'll send it to you after this. But it's very, very interesting. He talks just about the whole breakdown of resources in Australia, and he was talking about inflation and the cost of living and all that. But he's also talking about the breakdown of what happens with resources and how that's siphoned out of Australia, and we get nothing pretty much. The only state that does is Western Australia, and they're the ones that are paying the cheapest prices at the moment for gas prices, because 15% of that money goes back to Western Australians. They're doing something like Norway does. So it's not all bad over there. They've actually seemed to be doing something right. But it just made me think, with this going on, with the toothlessness of our leaders to actually do anything about Julian Assange. I mean, and to think that if we had done the same thing to an American journalist here, can you imagine what would have happened then? So it really makes me believe that the US and that deep state's really got something over Australia and our leaders, because for us to be giving away our resources, we've got more resources in most things. Gas, what's the stuff that they're using in batteries? Sorry.
Cobalt, lithium. Yes.
Huge amounts of lithium. Huge amounts of uranium. We're not allowed to use our own uranium. We're not allowed to use our own coal. We've got to ship it off. There's something going on in that space that I'm not quite sure what it is. But
we can have nuclear powered submarines, but we can't have nuclear power generation to provide for our cities and factories and whatever. How does that work?
Yeah, it's clear that we don't make our own decisions here. We are told what to do, and it's so much more clear after that interview. And I'd love you to watch it, and everybody else watching this too, because it's and Macro Business is a really, really good resource, by the way. We'll get into the resources later on.
My husband pointed out this morning that no Australian Prime Minister has ever been able to find out what the hell the Yanks are doing at Pine Gap. So this is, again, something that Tucker Carlson pointed out. We have American troops garrisoned on our shores. That's called occupation. There's no bloody way that they would permit there to be an Australian military base on their shores. So yeah, we were Britain's bitch. Now we're America's bitch. And if any Australian Prime Minister said, I want to close Pine Gap, like, get out of our sovereign territory. We don't know what you're doing there. You're making us a potential nuclear target. This is not right for our citizens. God only knows what would happen. I mean, none of them have been afraid to do it. And, there's very clear evidence that the CIA was instrumental in the dismissal of Gough Whitlam. Now, look, and my views of Whitlam and what he did in his prime ministership have changed a lot over the last few years as my political outlook has changed. But nonetheless, I mean, it was pretty clear that he wanted to take Australia in a different direction. And both the palace and the CIA were really involved in toppling him. And there's, I mean, that's a whole other topic to get into. But yes, I mean, we're not a sovereign country. We don't behave like one.
No, that's more and more clear. And I mean, to be honest, I haven't looked into this a lot, but the fact that the Australian government and the Australian Commonwealth is on the American stock market as its own identity.
Yeah, I've got a lot made of that. As you know, my husband's an ex-lawyer, and he said, look, I mean, that's purely and simply for the purpose of listing securities, right? So Australia. Sorry, I'm going to get details wrong here, but anyway, when the Australian government wants to issue bonds, for instance, they have to have that corporate number with the US in order to be able to do that, so that they can trade bonds on the international market. So that's the smoking gun that people make it out to be.
No, it's definitely not a smoking gun, but you got to ask yourself the question: is why is that required for a country to be on another country's stock market so they can operate that way? So it's not so much for me that Australia is not, real, and there's no real queen and all that stuff that the sovereign citizens are talking about. It's the fact that the system is set up in that way that a country has to be run as a business rather than a sovereign nation to survive. And to be run as a business, you have to make all sorts of concessions to your safety and to your rights, and you've got to swallow your pride. You can't, and if you don't, then you end up like, the dreadful nations like Russia and Iran and everywhere else that doesn't quite follow the script.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. And why is it set up that way? Well, it's very clear. Britain had its empire, and then it went into decline, and the center of power shifted to the US, and it became the empire manager. And now the center of power and wealth obviously is being shifted again. It's being shifted east, and we see that very clearly again. If you look at who was behind opening up China and industrializing China, it's famously Nixon was the first US president to visit China, but who did he send ahead of him? Wasn't
it Kissinger?
Kissinger. Yeah. And who was Kissinger? He was the Rockefeller boy, right? So why was China opened up and developed, by the money power? Because they knew at some point they'd be shifting the center of power and money eastward.
Yeah.
So again, I mean, and this just really makes me question everything that's going on the world stage. Is this just a puppet show, right? All of these maneuverings, all of these rumblings, we're really concerned that China is going to take Taiwan and there'll be a war there. Like, I don't know, call me crazy, but I just don't believe any of these people. What if they're all actors in this? What if Putin's an actor in this? I mean,
I believe
he was
they
a leader, wasn't he? He was Klaus's little. I was going to say something really offensive then, but anyway, he was in with that crew, and now he's in the bad books. Is he really? I don't know.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, who wins? Who wins out of all this? The military-industrial complex.
Yeah, that's right. The ordinary people don't. They get slaughtered. They get their wealth stolen from them. They get royally shafted. You know.
Yeah. I mean, you can go back as far as setting up Israel, and I know a lot of people would just be like, "It's all the Israelis. The Israelis set it up. They went in there," which is true. The Israelis did go in there, and they did go in and do the Nakba and all these horrible things. But in the end, having a nation like Israel with a completely different religion to the rest of the countries, maybe bar Lebanon, which is partly Christian, and Syria, which is mostly Christian, I believe. Apart from that, what purpose does it serve to have them there? It creates conflict. It's the same with North and South Korea. What a great way to have that. You've got North and South Vietnam at the time fighting with each other. Great. Military-industrial complex, sell weapons. You know, you just look at if you've read Smedley Butler's War is a Racket, you know, and if whoever hasn't read that, it's a very easy read. It's not very long, and it just this is written, what, 1920 or something, or whenever it was written, discussing exactly how the military-industrial complex works. And this is
I was a high-class man for the corporations. That's what he said. Conducting all these operations to topple those precious democratically elected leaders, or certainly, you know, popularly elected leaders in Central and South America and other places. You know, Israel. You know, I've been really asking myself a lot. Well, ever since the October incident popped off. What was that incident? It's going to take us years to really get to the bottom of what that was. But anyway, ever since that popped off.
The controlled demolition of the border, you mean?
Yeah. That and just, anyway, the fact that Israel knows exactly where the Hamas leaders are. You know, you and I talked about this very, very early on. They know exactly where the leaders of Hamas are. They're sitting in Qatar, and they could easily take those guys out, and they don't. So what does that tell you? But anyway, so I've been really asking myself the question: what is Israel? I mean, it's not. How can you say it's the Jewish state when it's actually the most secular country on earth, right? The Zionists were not religious Jews. They were specifically irreligious Jews, or a-religious Jews, you might say. They were people who looked down upon religious Jews. That is Jews who kept all the laws, all however many hundred of them there are. They were contemptuous of these people. So don't tell me it's the Jewish state. That's a total ploy. So what is Israel? You know, it is certainly the creation of the bankers. There's no doubt about that. Why is it parked there in the Middle East? Yeah, it certainly creates conflict, no doubt. But you know, there's more to it than that. I mean, you know, anyone who spends 5 minutes looking into what happened to the USS Liberty has got to have some very, very serious questions about what the relationship of the other countries of the West is with Israel. How is it that Israel can do, for those of you who don't know, just look up the USS Liberty, right? It'll take you 5 minutes to get this story. But the idea that the supposed ally of the United States could fire missiles at, drop napalm on the decks of, fire torpedoes at, and machine gun the lifeboats of a United States naval ship when they knew that it was a naval ship, and then get cover for that from American politicians, including, I was shocked to find out, Senator Robert F. Kennedy. Stood up in the Senate and said, oh, there's been a terrible mistake. My Aunt Fanny, there was a terrible mistake. They knew exactly what they were doing. And that whole incident of the USS Liberty, there's never been any justice for the survivors or the people who were horribly injured in that attack. So how is it that a country can do that to a supposed ally and get away with it?
Isn't that funny, hearing you say that about Robert F. Kennedy, which I didn't know, that and then seeing his son now supporting Israeli plight so heavily, not even sort of in a backward way. It's just right there. I mean, obviously you pick up things from your parents, and it's only natural to believe something your father believed or taught you, especially when you're such a notable man like Robert F. Kennedy. So, but yeah, it's really hard to believe that anything's real these days. To be honest with you, it is just a big puppet show. And
real is what you encounter in your family and with your neighbors and your friends. That's the only thing that I can really trust anymore. Yeah.
And it's one of those things also, if it is a big puppet show, who's the puppet show for? And I think the puppet show's for us, is to keep us entertained, for one, scared.
Look over so that what we're doing over there escapes your attention. We're busy fleecing you and harming you in all sorts of ways. But don't look over there. Look over here at the celebritards and the political Punch and Judy show of a demented old man and orange man having this debate.
I know. I listened to that for I think the first sort of half an hour the other day, and I'm just thinking, this is insane that we've got these two old people. One's pretty much sharp as a tack. The other one has clearly got dementia. And when you're being told that it's not happening, you don't see what you see. He's fine. He's perfectly with it. These are shows. Yeah, these shows are put on. They're put on for us to be distracted. They're like, oh, we can't have this demented man, and then we're going to go for someone else. We're going to get someone else to save us. Oh, Trump. How do we know that this hasn't been orchestrated in the first place just so Trump can get in? Like we've speculated in the past, so then they can run the economy down and do all this other shit because that's what they want to do. We need to start thinking outside the circle a little bit. Not a little bit, a lot, because at the moment, this puppet show is consuming everyone. And, this is, I guess we'll segue into why we are choosing to go in another direction at the moment. But one of the reasons why is because I think there's so much entertainment now in this category that what we're doing. I know we've always tried to keep it pretty straight-laced and not try to be too over dramatic about things, and try to get people to come back the next week and all that sort of thing. There's a lot of that going on in here, but what we really need is solutions. We need more people to be standing up, and there's so many good people in this space doing what we're doing right now in a really great way, and they're doing it in a really thoughtful way too, without stirring up controversy, just saying the facts as they are. So what we're going to do now is, we've spoken about the Freedom of Information Generator. I think we need to get more of these tools out to the Australian public, and the world as a whole needs to be doing more of this. But if you mentioned earlier the idea of a parallel society, would you like to explain what that means exactly? I know there's a history of I can't remember which European country it was that actually experimented with that during communist times, but
it was Czechoslovakia, as I recall. Pretty sure it was Czechoslovakia, yeah. And so essentially, because obviously the communist system was just wildly inefficient, and it was breaking down over many years, and everybody knew that to be the case, but of course they were afraid to say that in public. And so people just began setting up I suppose networks. I was going to say institutions, and I guess eventually these kind of ad hoc networks become solidified into institutions, but they began essentially setting up peer-to-peer systems to replace those that were breaking down. And that would include peer-to-peer networks for distributing actual news, rather than what everybody understood was the propaganda emanating from from the higher ups. education, effective systems for actually teaching useful information to people. And I guess, networks for distributing food. If I was telling you, before we hit record, the local community Facebook group here, someone just posted the other day, I got a load of lemons. There's a bunch of lemon trees near me. The fruit's literally falling on the ground. Does anyone want to come, to this house in the middle of town and get some? I'm like, yeah. Right. And apparently like dozens of people descended on this woman's home and just got themselves some free lemons. And so, and then after that, I walked over to this guy. They've got a house in the town and then a small acreage just out of the town. They grow fruit and veg, and they have beehives and whatever. And he just sells fruit and veg and honey out of his garage. Cash pay. And it's great because we're not fully self-sufficient here, if we ever do get to be. So that's what I mean by parallel networks. And it doesn't rely on me going to Woolies, God forbid, or Coles or IGA or anything else. So these are the kinds of parallel systems where people start interacting directly with other people, not intermediated by government, not intermediated by a corporation. They're just directly interacting with each other. And that's what we need to be focusing on.
Yeah, I mean, it's what the old decentralized blockchain system for Bitcoin's based on, isn't it? You're dealing directly with each other through, they are technically through intermediaries, but it's just basic stuff. And I mean, you said self-sufficient there. You don't really need to be self-sufficient. All you need to be is part of you need to be part of a greater community. And you need to be interconnected with people.
Yes. People who will look out for each other if there's any kind of difficulty, whether that's you've got an elderly neighbor, and so the people in the neighborhood just get together and they say, okay, you check in on him today and I'll check in on him tomorrow, and if no one's sort of seen him outside his house for a couple of days, someone will go around and knock on his door and make sure he's okay. You're not waiting for the state to find out that he had a fall in his bathroom and banged his head and he's been, unable to get up for 3 days, because people who know him and care about him actually take care of that themselves.
Yeah, it's one of the most tragic stories you hear in the news, isn't it? When you just hear about they've found someone after like 6 months in their house because nobody cares about them and nobody knew they were gone. But obviously people would know if they haven't seen that person for a while, but they're like, well, it's someone else's problem.
I think so. Yeah, very often it's smell that's coming out of the place. You kind of go, wow, it had to get to that. That's really sad. And look, this is the state infantilizes people, right? It just makes people dependent on mummy state or daddy state, depending on whether it's nurturing mummy providing welfare or disciplinarian daddy providing the police force, whatever, right? So that people are not taking care of things themselves. It's again moving to a rural area. This really kind of comes to the fore. I remember having a chat with my neighbour once about there was some I can't quite remember what was happening. There was a bit of a crime spree in the area. People sending drones up over the properties to identify equipment that they could get in and steal. And I said something about like the police station here is only manned or womaned 3 days a week. We share our coppers with another town down the street. They get them on the weekends, which tells you a lot about the town I live in. There's no coppers here on a Friday night. Anyway, so I said something about that, and she just looked at me and she went, well, no one would report that to the police, dear. They just take care of it themselves. I'm like, okay then.
That's the thing, isn't it? If you've got a whole bunch of criminals out there, knowing that people are going to take care of stuff themselves, they're probably not going to do it in the first place.
The guy's got a rifle, and he's a bit of practice with it, so he can aim. So you feeling lucky, punk?
Yeah, you've got states in the United States where they've got open carry, for instance, and they're the states where you probably least likely get a shot, because
100%.
nobody really wants to pull a gun on someone who knows they've got a gun.
You're going to take that risk in the 7-Eleven, right? You go up to the counter and try to hold the place up, and the guy who's just like browsing for chewing gum or whatever says, "What do you think you're doing?" He pulls out his gun, and, yeah.
Yep. So we need more of this stuff going on. So not only we have the freedom of information generator, which, to be honest, we haven't actually gotten anything off the ground yet. We've only just started thinking about this sort of stuff. But I've also just purchased solutionsaustralia.org. And on this site, I'm hoping to collate, and I will need help with this. So if anybody's listening to this right now, I've been really encouraged by the amount of emails we've been getting lately to our email address, which has been fantastic. So if anybody does want to help out with stuff or has some skills in that area, basically want to connect people. We don't want to do everything ourselves. If there's a service out there that's not going, then we'll work on developing that ourselves. But there's so many great people out there, and I think the Aligned Council of Australia, this whole project's really kicked that off, where it's just bringing people together and using their expertise to do something great. And it's been very effective.
I reinvent the wheel. When there's people who've got the expertise, they've got the campaigning experience. Yeah, like that's again the power of these decentralized networks. That people know people who know people who know people who can get that job done. Yeah, or who can get you that information.
So we're talking more like a decentralized Yellow Pages almost, where you can just connect with the thing you want to do. If it's homeschooling, if you need to meet homeschooling people in your area, for instance, if you just want to buy meat from someone who is not going to be using mRNA technology in their cows or anything like that, and it doesn't need to be. You don't need to be anti-vax or whatever. You just need to want to maybe live more healthy, not so infantilized by the state. And this is a way I believe, and I know you share my views here, that I think we can actually change things. Because if you just fight all the time against the system, part of me thinks that's exactly what they want, and part of me thinks that it's kind of futile in a lot of places.
And it just disperses energy. I guess going back to what happened in Czechoslovakia, eventually this authoritarian government just kind of toppled under the weight of its own incompetence and malfeasance. And rather than the country just dissolving into anarchy in the in the commonly used sense of the word, as opposed to the political philosophy of anarchy, which is something totally different, these parallel networks were already there, right? So there was like a smooth transition to a well-functioning, pretty autonomous nation. Whereas what you see so often, I'm thinking of the Arab Spring, where you had this uprising, and again, I mean, I know that was heavily manipulated, right? The various intelligence services were openly using social media, especially Twitter, to stir people up and get them out on the street and whatever. But okay, so you get people going, "Oh, we're going to overthrow the government, yay!" And then what comes in its place? Well, basically, whatever party had the strongest organization is going to step straight into that power vacuum, right? So you want to think through what you're going to replace the existing power structure with, okay? Because if you haven't thought that through, if you don't have those parallel systems in place, the tyrant that you topple is liable to get replaced by someone who's at least as bad and maybe even worse, or a system that's even worse. Yeah. And I guess the other thing is that if you make those parallel systems, like the more people who get involved in them, the more attractive they become, and the more people start to defect from the sort of the crumbling, moldy infrastructure of the existing state, which clearly doesn't care about us. And people start being attracted over there, because whoa, those children who are being home educated in this home education pod, they seem really smart. They're switched on. See them the street, they're well behaved, they're productive, they can speak to adults, and people go, wow, my kid's doing really badly in the public school system. I'd like my kid to be more like those kids over there. And so people start going, maybe I could pull my kid out of the, state indoctrination camp. Likewise, the pathetic medical system that we have. If you've got parallel systems where people are clearly getting better health outcomes and they're shining examples of it, you're going to get more and more people defecting from the existing system. That one's a tough one in Australia because, again, Medicare is completely infantilized people because it's free. Increasingly, it's not because doctors aren't bulk billing. But even when it is, it's not free. You pay for it.
Yep.
And you don't get a good value because you're getting terrible service.
Yeah, you get a bulk billing doctors. They just throw you through the ring, don't they? Go, oh yeah, come in. Oh yeah, what's wrong? Okay, no worries. Next, more people that can see in an hour, more money they get. So it's
exactly. And never forget, these people wanted to inject you and your granny and your kids with experimental mRNA goo. So why are you going back to them? Yeah.
I know, it's crazy, and I think the problem there is that people don't have a choice. They don't have the option. They don't have the option of, especially people that are struggling financially.
Yeah.
They have to go to these. They have to go to these places because it's the only place they can go to. And the likelihood is, if they're struggling financially, they're probably not eating right, which makes them more likely to get sick, which makes them more likely to get more sick because they put them on more and more drugs, and then they feed into the system. They're very good. All this stuff's very good for the system. So that if we just have some sort of alternative, which we can do. We've got the resources to do it. We've got a great thing called the internet, which we haven't used effectively so far. And
no, it was, well, I mean, actually it was designed for sharing porn and for military, but we, however, the people who really launched it, like, what's his name? Tim Berners, the guy I'm talking about.
Yeah, Berners-Lee, I think his name is.
Berners-Lee, yeah, that's it. Yeah. I mean, when those guys saw what it was capable of, they envisaged it as a way to just to completely decentralize power and sharing of information, which is kind of indistinguishable, really. Sharing of information and power, spot the difference. So we haven't utilized it to its to anywhere near its full potential. And no, the full potential is not you sharing cat videos, okay, folks? No. I love this idea, and I really do hope that our listeners are going to be, they're going to have their brains popping off with ideas right now of, what they would like to see on it, resources that they already know of that they want to bring to your attention to put on it, Mitch, and and again, people just pitching in and saying, I've got these skills. Can I help? Yes, please.
Yeah, definitely, and we'll open that up. Very shortly. I'm going to get something off the ground just to start up and just to get a few resources on there, especially just connecting the different like-minded organizations and groups, the ACA, Stand Up Australia, everybody, Australia Access the WHO, your Substack. There's so many good like resources out there that people can look at, but to start and to know where to look and to actually have that in a space that's not completely overwhelming. That's something that just does not exist right now. So we hope to create that where you can just go on, and you don't need to be inundated with information that you don't really need. You just need to know what you need to look for, and then afterwards you can go exploring and see what else you might take your fancy. Yeah.
But really, the emphasis of this whole project is to take action. And one of the unfortunate side effects of being deluged with information, as we all are, is that very often has the effect of just paralyzing people. And I, put my hand up with that. I mean, you just get deluged with information, and most of it, of course, there's nothing directly that you can do about it. And unfortunately, this tends to lead to passivity and becoming black-pilled. So, yes, take action. Small actions are great. Get started with small.
Yep. And all you need to do is the thing you're good at, and that's it. You don't need to do everything else. Just the one thing you're good at. The one thing you can do that, do it well, and then we can connect all that together and create a better world, basically, in a nutshell.
Yeah. Yep. And that's a grandiose goal. And yeah, absolutely. So let's have some grandiose goals, as long as we're not just kind of, dreaming pie in the sky. Oh, a better world is out there if we just take actions. Okay. Yeah.
If we just vote harder.
Vote harder. That's it. That's it. The political savior. Oh my God. Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to finish up the podcast today by going through some of your recommendations for people we can flick onto after they've listened to this episode. If they want to get some information that we enjoy listening to, and that is not too out there. Like, everything's pretty out there these days, but stuff that they can actually rely on being truthful and backed in research and multiple sources and all that sort of stuff. So what would you recommend? We'll go firstly your Australian news sources, and then we'll maybe shift on to some international ones.
Okay. So look, Rebecca Barnett's Substack is really top notch. And oh God, what is the name of it? Dystopian Down Under. Yeah, really solidly researched. Meryl Dory's Substack, Informed Choice Substack. That's great. Kind of, short, punchy pieces. She links to a lot of other people's work, so you can get the fuller story. I really like Philip. Oh, I'm blanking on his name. Philip the pharmacist. I'm talking about. What is his name? I'll send it. I'm just temporarily blanking on his name. So I like his work. And then of course Julian Gillespie. So a lot of these resources are on Substack, because honestly it's the place to be. So that would be my short list of homegrown sources in terms of news. And then in terms of groups that are really taking action, a lot of our listeners are going to be already signed up to the mailing list of either Aligned Council of Australia or organisations that belong to that. And so I think in terms of like a central clearinghouse of here's what's going on, that's really relevant to Australia's situation, and also here's what you can do about it. That's pretty hard to beat. And I love the notion of like, rather than amalgamating these groups, which have different interests, I love the idea that they just sort of come together to say, hey, this is a project that we're working on jointly, but we still retain our own membership and our own reason for being. So I think it's a great model.
It's like we don't agree on everything, but we agree on this, and we're gonna.
Yeah, we agree on this, and that's powerful, because otherwise you end up in the Judean People's Front versus the People's Front of Judea versus the Popular People's Front. For those of you who haven't watched The Life of Brian, just go watch it, you'll understand. Those of you who have, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Splitters. Because if you try to amalgamate groups, you're always going to end up with people who say that this group doesn't believe what I believe on this particular issue. Oh, Jesus. Okay. Can we just agree on this thing over here and all get together to work on that? So yeah, it's a great model. And then there are some fantastic homeschooling networks, which I don't have off the top of my head, but we'll put these in the show notes. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. There are. I know the ones you're talking about, which we will put in there. And this is going to be part of the new website as well. There's going to be a whole homeschooling section. As I've mentioned on the podcast before, we do homeschool now. We actually do a remote homeschooling. So there's a homeschooling academy, which I'll link in the show notes now, and set up by someone who was affected by, their children were affected by COVID-19 and took the kids out of school. Thought maybe other parents could deal with this. And then they've hired a lot of people who were fired from the mandates. So a lot of the teachers here, like-minded people, and it's a great initiative. And again,
decentralized, right? So you take the people who are employed by the state, who the state got rid of because they wouldn't comply, and you match them up with the people who have the need, which is the parents of the children who need the teachers who are actually skilled in a subject. It's brilliant. It's such a brilliant solution to the
Side note: if there was an alternative economy out there for teachers, do you think they would have put in mandates in the first place, knowing that they would have just been able to get Waterscope to the other side? You know, it's like having two rival sporting leagues with the same sport. One has to well, you're not getting I'm not getting enough here, so I'll just go over here. Exactly the same thing. So the more options we have, the less power the other side has.
Yes, exactly, and yes, and the more control over our own lives and our families' lives as well, we're taking back. Yep.
Definitely.
What are yours? What did I miss out that's on your list?
So I listened to Club Grubbery on
Oh,
Rumble.
of course. Sorry, just it popped into my head. Philip Altman. That's a Substack I was thinking of before.
Yep.
Yeah. Club Grubbery. I mean, yeah, fabulous.
I love the way those two fire off each other. They're always very truthful. They don't say stuff they can't really, prove. A lot of they will speculate like everybody does, but I just like the way they go about it. It's interesting, and yeah, it's entertaining as well. But it's also solutions focused most of the time.
Yeah. That's
as far as that, Rebecca Barnett, I'll have to double up on that. I always read her Substack. And obviously, Australia Exits the Who. I find their information really well researched. And once again, I was going to say Meryl Dory too. So there are a bunch of other Australian content creators. I just would like to sort of. It's not a warning because you can do whatever the hell you want, really. But I just think that you need to look at people's intentions and are they doing this because it's a job, and look at the products they do spruik to you. Is this something that you would buy or you think is actually going to be beneficial to people and the environment and all sorts of other things? Take that into account. Are they left wingers? Are they right wingers? All these sorts of things. As long as you've got these things in mind, then by all means watch whatever you want, because everybody has some good information. You just need to listen to the information and not take it as gospel from the person.
That's right. And like spread your information sources over a broad spectrum, including the political spectrum. It is good to listen to the saner voices on the left, let's just say, and the saner voices on the right, and the ones in the middle, and just get different perspectives on things. Yeah, you'll learn a lot more that way, and you'll run far less of a risk of just getting locked into a position that you're just ideologically committed to, but you can't really support with evidence.
Yeah, just that Marshall McLuhan saying it was the medium is the message. So. And that, unfortunately, is true. The medium that's coming from is the message people hear. It's not the actual message they're saying. It's who's saying it. So if we can just look past that and then get the important information, it doesn't matter who's saying it. It could be Albanese or Dutton. It could be Trump. It could be Biden. Biden can say some coherent things sometimes.
Probably not going to be more often than not, but on rare occasions.
But the two of the biggest sources that I go to is one, the Highwire and ICANN. I think they are so well researched and won't say anything without being able to prove it first. And
very
the lawyer they got working with them, Aaron Siri, is just amazing. And I've still yet to see anybody take that guy down, because they just won't even attempt, because it would just be too damn bad.
They won't even try. He will, in his very polite and measured fashion, he will intellectually rip them limb from limb and just leave their battered and bloody corpse on the floor. He's that good.
Oh, yeah. He is that good. When you deal in facts and only things you can prove legally, then unfortunately people cannot argue with you.
You don't have to go for hyperbole. You just stick with the facts, and the facts are just so damning. Yeah. His depositions of Stanley Plotkin and Catherine Edwards, which you can watch in their entirety on the ICANN. Is it on the ICANN website or on the Highwire website? It's on one of them anyway.
It's probably linked on the Highwire website, but it would probably link to ICANN.
Yeah.
So.
I think,
That's the organisation that Siri works for. So
I think it is on.
Doesn't work for them. He works for himself. But yeah. And apart from that, like I know we've talked about Grand Theft Auto podcast a bit. If you are into actually listening to things and piecing things together yourself, then that's a really good one. If you can spare 7 hours of your time, or 3 hours on double speed.
Well, like what 1.8 speed I can go to before it gets too much. It's fantastic. It's done absolute wonders for my understanding of all like essentially it provides the backstory, the historical context for so much of what is still going on to this very day. And on that note, James Corbett, I can't even remember how I stumbled across James Corbett, but it was early on in the scamdemic, and oh my God, that blew my mind. And once again, all of these things that you've just kind of taken as given, taken as you were told, and then you find out, oh no, you've been sold a total story. So that's a great one. And then I love UK Column. UK Column is great. Their reporting is obviously more UK Europe centric, although they have brought in reporters from the US. So they've got oh man, why am I blanking on people's names today? They've got what's her face in Syria. Oh, that is so rude.
I know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about. I mean, she's great. So they do really solidly research stuff. It's their news program is just super punchy, very, very tight storylines, and then they do the more in-depth interviews and whatnot. Who else do I lean on a lot? I must say, I mean, as we were talking about before, there are some questions around Glenn Greenwald, but I've really been getting into Glenn Greenwald's podcast and there are some areas where I think he's either deliberately skirting around the deeper story, or maybe he's genuinely unaware of it, but he's really solid on the politics behind the major issues that are plaguing us. So who else would I say internationally? I mean, God, if you look at my podcast subscriptions, there's just gazillions of them, but I think that they'd be my really solid picks. And then there are some others that are more just for shits and giggles, basically.
Yeah. I think one I've listened to for years is called the No Agenda podcast, and it's one that's really it's really causes you to think about what's going on and the fact that nothing's really as it seems, but in a very entertaining and comedic way. So it's one of those shows you can hear about the most depressing thing, but you come out laughing from after listening to it, because it's very well produced. It's actually made by the man who invented podcasting, Adam Curry, and so he barely gets ever credited for it. Really, really good listen. If you just want to have a good laugh at current events and you want to listen to just one thing a week.
Hesitant to add any more bloody podcast subscriptions, but I will have a little sample at your advice. Your advice is pretty solid, so I'll go there.
And the last one I recommend is what I've already recommended it during the podcast is for any economic, but in saying that economic is basically the news itself, is Macro Business. And I would say they are more right-leaning. They are more of a right-wing rag, but the information they put out is very, very on the money, especially to do with the economy. So if you read something in the Age or the Herald Sun or whichever the rags are in your local city, go to Macro Business and have a look at what they say about it, because the likelihood is it's the complete opposite, and they'll be more truthful than the other guys. So. Yeah, and I'll link to that interview as well from Macro Business, which I talked about earlier in the show notes too. I think it's going to be a pretty long show notes today. A lot of links in there.
A lot of links, indeed. Yeah. But I mean, that's what we wanted to do today, is really just set people up with resources and encourage them to stay connected, so that when do you think you're going to be ready to launch?
Oh, I'm not sure. But yeah, we'll get some sort of prototype up in the next 2 weeks. Sorry.
Okay. Cool.
And yeah, definitely, even if it's just a landing page with a suggestions box or something like that, then
that's great. And people can just hop on the mailing list and throw in their 2 cents worth about what they would like to see included. And that, that also means, like, if you can see a lack, if there's a gap in providing, some important service, and you think someone ought to do that, well, number one, maybe it's you. But if for some reason that's really out of the question for you, you can always say, hey, you know what I really need in my neighborhood? I would like to pull my kid out of school, but there just isn't, or I haven't been able to find a home education network. Great. All right. There's a gap. Let's see if you can get help to fill that.
Definitely. That's the whole point of it, just to make it easier, so you're not overwhelmed. So, but yeah, please email. Just get in touch and help out, and keep an eye out on Stand Up Australia and Robin's Substack as well for future updates. And
yes. Yeah. All right. Fantastic. Well, it was good to get the band back together one last time.
Certainly was. So one commenter on one of our videos when we had a break last time said, "Welcome back, Connor." So
for those of you who are old enough to get the reference, good for you.
So yeah, I think that was they were doing reruns of that show when I was a kid. So it was.
I watch reruns. Yes,
it's a great show, that one. But yeah, so for the meantime, it's goodbye. But we'll most likely see you again in another form.
Au revoir, rather than whatever the French is for final goodbye. My French is terrible. We won't go there.
Is that French? No,
no, that's Italian. That's Italian. I know that much.
Obviously, I know. Yeah. Well, thank you, and thanks for all the amazing chats over the time. And
it's been great. And look, this is not the final one. I think once we've got more to discuss, we probably won't do a regular show, but just like periodic updates to let you know what's on the site, how you can contribute, all of that stuff. So haven't heard the last of us. Can't get rid of us that easily.
Definitely not that easy. All right. Well, thank you, and I'll speak to you soon. But the rest of you,
later.
Thanks for tuning in.
Okay. Bye for now.